last session of we'll get underway with the last session of the day. Thanks to all of you who are still hanging in there with us after a long day of being virtual. We hope to see everybody tomorrow in person at the Blue Ball Barn starting at 2 o'clock for our annual meeting and additional speakers. So you can check out the details on our website, but please reserve a seat if you haven't already. So for our last session of the day, last but not least, for sure, we have the honor of having Gwen Davis here, and Gwen is the Delaware's Deputy State Historic Preservation Office, and that is held within the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs. And Gwen has the privilege of leading a dedicated team of archaeologists, architectural historians, and information resource specialists, all who carry out the work of the State Historic Preservation Office. Gwen holds degrees in anthropology with a specialization in archaeology from the University of Delaware and the State University of New York at Albany, a master's from there. And we are going to cover in this session the current state of affairs of the State Historic Preservation Plan and get feedback from hopefully any of you who wish to give it, and just kind of talk about its significance for the state in moving forward regarding historic resources and preservation. So I will turn things over to Gwen.
Thank you, Dee. All right. Is my screen showing?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. So, well, I want to first of all just say, sorry guys, there's not going to be a lot of pretty or ugly photographs in this particular presentation. And also want to just say how much I appreciate being included in this session and hearing all of the important work that's going on and the work and the research that's been happening around the state in the other mentioned in the other presentations. A theme I am hearing, of course, is the importance of planning. And even Barksdale's presentation actually speaks to this in some indirect way of like, okay, what were they thinking? Let's see what's going on. Okay. So in talking about the preservation plan, we're going to be discussing our ongoing efforts to seek input for the upcoming revisions to the State Historic Preservation Plan. It's an opportunity to talk about current issues, take stock of what's been working well, what still needs to be enhanced, and where more attention needs to be focused, and setting goals for the next 5 years and outlining how they possibly could be achieved. This involves all stakeholders. I'm going to be talking about this a lot. This is not just the SHPO's plan. This involves all stakeholders, public and private. And I'm going to be providing a little background on, as shown here on the screen, the purpose, the content, the process for developing the plan, and a little bit about what we've been hearing so far in our public outreach process. And then lastly, and hopefully not least, is to hear your thoughts with an opportunity at the end for some question and answer and some suggestions, hopefully from you guys. I also just want to make a note that some who are attending the session may have, if you heard a version of this presentation at the public meeting that we had back in September, or at our State Review Board for Historic Preservation meeting that was held last week. There's going to be a lot of similarities, but we have some new details in it of our analysis so far to show, so hope you hang in there. And just another opportunity to hear your thoughts. Okay. All right, so what is a State Historic Preservation Plan? Why do we have one? Why is it important? It's a 5-year plan for historic preservation work throughout the entire state. It provides a framework for everyone who is involved in historic preservation. It is required for every state and territory to have a state historic preservation plan. It was established as part of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And the National Park Service actually sets the requirements for these plans and has to approve the plan. So the SHPO is, we facilitate this public process to develop the plan. We're responsible for the process. We conduct the research. I also want to mention here my colleague Hannah Lewis, who has been instrumental in helping work on this plan this time around. We're reaching out to stakeholders and conducting surveys, holding meetings such as this, analyzing the data, taking into account what we've heard at the public meetings, and then writing and disseminating the plan, also with points of input in that part of the process. But again, as I mentioned earlier, this is not just here's what the SHPO is going to be working on for the next 5 years. This is intended to be, although obviously we refer to this work regularly, this plan throughout our work, but it is meant as a framework for all to use. It describes a vision for historic preservation in the state as a whole, coordinating statewide preservation activities, and for communicating statewide preservation policy, goals, and values to all the constituencies, decision makers, and interested and affected parties across the state. And here I can't emphasize enough the importance of organizations such as Preservation Delaware and other statewide and local history or historic preservation related organizations in this whole process and in carrying out aspects of the plan. And you see here on the screen a picture of the cover of the current plan, which I will be talking about in reference a little bit later on. So the National Park Service defines what the purpose of the plan is. There's supposed to be broad public and professional participation in planning for historic and cultural resources. And it is supposed to be unique to each state and territory. So it is supposed the part of this process is defining what those challenges are, and then looking for some actions that might help address those challenges that are specific to Delaware. And also, this is a third point, and I can't emphasize this one enough. It is also intended to influence historic preservation policy in the state and for local governments. There are a lot of other statewide planning efforts that are going on right now. I unfortunately found out kind of at the last minute that the Office of State Planning Coordination, which has its plan for state strategies and spending for the state, that's not the full title of that document. They are also updating their plan, and they held their public meeting the same day that we had ours. So, and also my understanding is that the DENREC is working on updating the climate action plan. So trying to integrate all these things together. And I will also mention that when we all developed the last plan, one of the key things that we were able to do is to have the Office of State Planning Coordination recognize that this plan is the state's public policy on historic preservation matters. So in their document, they are cross-referencing this plan. So, and then lastly, it is also just supposed to be an inspiration for local communities, organizations, and individuals to act on specific things that are outlined in the plan. So again, why it's important for the public to have a voice here. Right. So what's in this plan? What does the National Park Service require that we include? So there's a lot of background information that goes into it. They call it kind of the environmental scan. It's about social, economic, political, and legal and environmental trends that affect historic resources and influence preservation practice. So that's looking broadly. Hannah's been doing a lot of the research on that, looking at where some of these other planning efforts are. What is the latest census data telling us about where people are and where they're living and the population, the nature of the population. Those kinds of data also are going into this background. There's also work that we do mostly at the State Historic Preservation Office is an assessment of the cultural resources in the state. We're looking at our data, looking at how many resources have been identified and inventoried in the state over the last several years since the last plan. And then, so there's some raw data that goes into that. But then there's also, again, where we're getting input from other folks about what have been some successes, what has been working well, what are some things that give us some hope on historic preservation front, while recognizing there has been certainly some losses and threats that have cropped up, but then from that coming opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of this as what we've been hearing so far. And then there, of course, there's also a required that we summarize the planning process that led to the plan. But the real heart of the plan is the priorities and goals. Historic preservation for the next 5 years. And so think about these priorities and goals that hopefully there are then distilled down to what are some specific action items that address the issues that have been identified, are reasonable to accomplish. I mean, we'd all would like to just say, hey, can we just have, $500 million a year to do whatever we want from some unknown source? But that is not likely to occur, right? So what are reasonable to accomplish? They're measurable. We can say, okay, we collectively as the state, folks who are interested in preservation, were able to accomplish some things, maybe not others, or maybe some partially, and maybe that took us into some other directions. But also, and as I said, also identifying potential leaders. This is not just something that the state can do on its own. There are certain things that will be assigned to our office to lead or carry out, but there also has to be other folks at the table who can take on some of this work because it is, a statewide concern. Okay. So in talking about the vision for the next plan, I'm going to reflect a little bit about the last plan. If you noticed from the screen shot that was on earlier, the plan was supposed to be from 2018 to 2022. Well, obviously we're a bit late in kind of getting started with this plan. There was disruption of COVID. Our office moved. We've had a lot of turnover in staff, a lot of things that kind of interrupted that process, but we're rolling now, right? That plan was also, it was rigorous in its development process. It was very comprehensive. It was very ambitious. It was very aspirational. Implementation has been, although I think there has been some work, that we can point to as successes and things that were accomplished, but it has been challenging for a lot of different factors. I think the other thing that really struck us in going back and looking at the existing plan is it's a bit cumbersome. It's 120 pages. There were 6 goals, 46 strategies, and 135 actions that were identified in this plan. So it's a lot to kind of think that could be taken on. So going back to that, what is reasonable to accomplish? So for the new plan, we are looking for it to be a lot more focused and purposeful, realistic and sustainable. And then also just looking at basic things like format. And we actually got some feedback about this in the public meeting that we did on how can we make this accessible in a format that can be used by everyone and not just, a big document that maybe not be something that people want to take off the shelf and use. So I've already alluded a little bit to what we've been doing so far. There was an online survey. That survey is actually still live. For those of you who haven't taken it yet, you are more than welcome to do so. And I've asked Hannah if maybe she can put in the chat the link there, and so again, and I'll talk about, and we'll mention that again at the end. So the online survey, I would say we had, I also just backing up a little bit, I want to mention that just in those intervening years, we haven't just been sitting around. I mean, there's also been some other planning outreach. Back in 2022, we worked with Preservation Delaware and the University of Delaware that had a harder look at governance and preservation in Delaware, comparing with other states. Earlier this year, our office also asked some of the preservation professionals to have a look at our survey guidelines for architecture and archaeology, and we've gotten some feedback there. And then Preservation Delaware, a year or so ago, was also kind of looking at some regulatory issues that might be maybe some changes that could be looking at the state level as opposed to just at the federal level. But just recently this year, as I said, online survey and public meeting engagement with specific stakeholders is in progress. This meeting here is an example of that kind of outreach. And we'll be talking in a little bit more detail. So in our outreach, what we've been in the online survey and in the public meetings, here's the kinds of things that we've been asking. I've kind of put these things together. So there's some demographics, like, all right, where are folks who are participating in the survey? Where are they living? What is their perception about whether they live in a rural area or an urban area? What is the age of folks who are participating? As you can imagine, more older people, less younger people. That's something that I think we're all being challenged with. We also asked about, why is historic preservation important to you? I think that's really, that was interesting. What we heard from folks is that the value of learning about the past and the sense of community and quality of life were really kind of key things of why historic preservation is important. We also asked about, as I mentioned earlier, successes. What's working well? What are some things that we can point to that have really kind of moved the needle a bit on some historic preservation work? We have heard some. I know sometimes we tend or it can be easy to just focus on the negative and what's been lost, but we did hear, some things that might be working better. Some talked about some specific properties where some work has been going on that have been to preserve, or at least is getting started. We also heard, especially at the public meeting, we heard some municipalities and particularly certified local governments of some things that they're doing to try and get more information about historic preservation tools out to their public. So, I mean, there's that we definitely have been hearing some good things. But of course, we all are also talking about some of the challenges, threats, and losses. There's clearly some folks there's some the scar tissue from some big losses. I was struck by, that we asked the question in such a way as to say, okay, in the last 5 years, some folks are bringing up some things that I know were lost actually more than 5 years ago. And so it still hurts, right? So some of these places that are really important to us and meaningful to our sense of place, they still hurt even after they've been gone for a while. And then there's, of course, there's ongoing concerns about specific properties, development that is continuing to pressure historic properties, and of course the need for funding. We also, and I'll be touching a little bit more detail on some of these things, we've asked about where are people getting information? Where's your go-to for looking for information on historic properties, the history of your community, and preservation tools? What are the roles of the various partners? And then getting down to the brass tacks of goals and strategies. And then lastly, just also, as I mentioned earlier, just looking for ways, some ideas, suggestions of how to make sure that this plan just doesn't sit on the back of my shelf, but is actually out there in the communities throughout the state with all the organizations, making it easier to use and pick up. And just also mentioning, so the data and the numbers from the survey are important, but I think I also just want to mention that the write-in responses, the comments that we've heard live on public meetings really will help shape this plan. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we're seeing that as we're working through the analysis. So I mentioned about sources of information. Where do people tend to get their information about historic places, historic properties, and information on preservation tools? And we asked this, in the survey, we set it up purposely so that there'll be a couple different kinds of ways you could answer. And overwhelmingly, local is where it's at. And of course, there's also state sources that some folks do come to us. There's social media and online. I thought, interesting. Some of the comments were, "Oh, I just talked to Professor Google." That was one of the responses in the survey. Preservation professionals, folks who already are connected to people, and they say, "Oh, I know. I'll just talk to the folks at the University of Delaware, or I'll talk to someone I know at Preservation Delaware, or the Archaeological Society of Delaware." Or the Delaware Historical Society. I mean, so I know that they, some folks that's their go-to. And then other folks are really digging into library and research facilities. But it really was impressive to me that of different kinds of local sources, it really was the most prevalent answer. This tells us that how important it is to make sure that local communities and local resources have up-to-date information on historic preservation, and some of the tools, the incentives, and just basic information, where to go for basic information. So this one was an important one for us. We felt like we needed to ask in this particular moment. I will mention, just reflecting, that it seems a little weird at this moment to be undertaking this plan when there's so much rapid change happening in, not here at home, but also across the country, and that could change. So we could make this plan, and then the landscape could continue to change. But we are in the moment where we are. But we included a question that asked in our survey, what do you think is the most important role of local government, state government, federal government, and nonprofits and advocacy groups? Just thinking again about capacity issues. We all can't do it all, and we can't do this work by ourselves. So how does the public see the most important roles of these different entities? And we had it set up so that you could answer, is it about funding? Is it about laws or programs? Is it about taking care of what they have, what you own? Is it education or guidance? But we also had the option to say all of the above, all are equally important. And we also had an option for saying, no, this particular entity doesn't really have a role at all, or much of a role at all. So we wanted to make it, wide enough that people could answer, right? So not terribly surprisingly, most people answered all of the above was important for everybody. But for those who differentiated, they felt like the federal government, their main responsibility was in funding sources, right? Or assisting in funding or access to other kinds of incentives. At the state level, It was laws and programs, but also assisting with funding and incentives. At the local, a little bit on the laws and programs, but also preserving their own resources. Now I have to pause here because I want to say that in the writing comments, we also heard that the state, that's a very important thing for the state to be considering as well in stewardship of properties that the state owns, and not just thinking about what the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs owns, but of course, many other state agencies have buildings, landscapes, and archaeological sites on properties that they manage. So even though the survey data skewed mostly for the local government on that point, recognizing that in the overall, the information received also was emphasizing the state here. And then for nonprofits and advocacy, it's just like what Dee was saying at the opening of this of today's session. It's providing assistance and guidance and educational resources for the public. So again, this is also very helpful in thinking about what roles and what kinds of activities should be where these entities might be placing their attention, or what the expectations are, at least from the public. So talking about some of the specific things that we asked about. So again, thinking about that the end game for this plan is to outline the overarching goals, strategies of how you might get to accomplish those goals, and then down to the brass tacks of the specific actions this set of folks might be able to take on this project. So we asked about the existing plan. Which of the goals from the previous plan do you think are still important to include in the next plan? And people could pick, as you know, everything, any that they wanted. As you can tell from this figure, there wasn't really any one thing that somebody said, no, kick that one out. They all seem to still be relevant in this moment, but strengthening and expanding the core programs and encouraging the inclusion of historic preservation values in landscape and community planning, as you can see, were still considered really important, maybe a little bit ahead of the others. As I'm working with our staff here, we're really looking to see how some of the ideas behind these broader goals as they were defined in the last plan could actually be sort of combined, and then also we'll talk about that in a few minutes on what we're hearing the public's thoughts about this. Okay, so from goals to strategies. Oops, excuse me. Earlier in the survey, we asked, well, when we were talking about the challenges and law and threats to historic preservation, we said, well, what are the best strategies and tools to address those kinds of things? And again, showing here, it's education to the public, and it's funding, and advocacy, and different sources of funding. Not so much skewing about the lobbying for new laws or regulations, but in just a little bit of a nuance here. In the write-in comments and in the public meeting, we did hear about, well, there may be some areas that at least either some adjustments to existing laws or regs might be helpful. And then at least some who are thinking a bit about maybe some new things. So again, sort of looking through all of the different comments, and we received a lot. I mean, if you've done a lot of surveys, you know that, okay, and we had 17 questions in this survey, which is maybe a lot, but so, and most, or I'd say we had a good mix of, click this box or check this circle, but there was also a fair amount of write-in. And, yeah, are you going to get some folks who skip that? But I was really impressed with how many people took the time to actually write in responses, and even those that were just click a box, there was always an other category where people could add comments. So we've been sifting through all of those comments, and then also what we heard at the public meeting in September, and now think what we are hearing heard from some of our state review board members last week. What it really, and you start to kind of, okay, how does this really categorize? And it really, to me anyway, comes down to three broad categories. It's governance at all levels, it's funding and incentives, and engagement. And I'll talk a little bit about these. In governance, we heard different views, and I think this is also really important to talk about here. We heard different views on the strength and implementation of local preservation ordinances. Some felt that they're too weak. Some felt that there wasn't enough teeth. I will say that there were a couple comments that were just highlighting that the work that Newcastle County has been doing, has been updating some of and adding to some of its ordinances as a potential model for the other counties to look to. But on the flip side, we also heard strong voices saying that in some cases there's not enough flexibility, and there may not be always great communication about what the rules are. And there were concerns expressed on the links between historic preservation and gentrification, and the lack of inclusion, and effects, and how it can historic preservation rules can inadvertently disproportionately affect folks from lower income, and the importance of connecting historic preservation with housing issues. That is actually something that's being discussed at a national level. The Federal Advisory Council on Historic Preservation actually updated its guidelines and recommendations on housing and historic preservation, and just trying to show that. Now, I will admit that some of that document was a little controversial, but the point was that demolishing historic buildings to make way for new housing is not necessarily the best approach, or at least not the only approach, and just really emphasizing the need to consider adaptive reuse of historic buildings, or just rehabilitation of existing historic buildings to help with housing issues. And also, as I alluded to earlier, stewardship of state and locally owned resources was something we heard a lot about. And stewardship in a couple of different respects. Some just talking about taking care of historic buildings that are owned by governments at the state and local level, appropriate rehabilitation and caring for them and using them, but also landscapes, concerns about archaeological resources, concerns about archaeological collections, and thinking about that. There was, in terms of specific legal or law related things, there was some discussion. I wouldn't say it was only really a few comments talking about the possibility of enacting a state level Section 106 law. And for those who don't know what Section 106 is, it is a federal, or as a part of the National Historic Preservation Act, that requires that federal agencies take into account the effects of their undertakings, whether funded, permitted, or otherwise, some subject to some federal approval, the effect that those kinds of undertakings may have on historic properties, on buildings, structures, objects, historic districts, and archaeological resources, and to some degree, landscapes. Some other states our surrounding states, as was noted in that 2022 study that we had with PDI and University of Delaware, some surrounding states do have such as a law, at least to some degree. Delaware does not. That I think that it's something that has been talked about a lot. I don't want to. I will have to say that if you these may be interesting and possible ideas to explore, always have to think about what the ramifications are and the capacity of not just our office, but other state agencies to take on that kind of new requirement. So I just mention it because it was one of the few things that was really spoken to as a specific potential new law, but it was, as I said, it was really only mentioned by a few people, so not a big emphasis here. In terms of funding and incentives, obviously there was the note for need of more of the same, but not really so much hearing about any specific ideas on how to make that happen. So we can say, oh, we need funding for this, either for specific buildings or specific programs. That's well and good, but when it comes down to actually planning an action item, it's like, okay, who takes that on to seek out new sources of funding, or thinking about things at the federal level in particular of sustaining what is already there. Particularly at the public meeting, we heard a discussion of how to perhaps make existing incentives more effective. We talked a little bit about the tax credit program. So the state, well, our office, we have a state tax credit program, which assists with defraying the cost for repair and rehabilitation of historic buildings. But there are some gaps there when it comes, and it can be partnered with the low-income housing tax credit, which is run out of the Delaware State Housing Authority. And so if you're a low-income individual, you can get extra tax credits for your project. But there's some issues there in that you still have to expend at least $5,000. And you have to have that cash available to put into it. And that creates maybe a gap for some folks to not be able to take advantage of that program. So I think that may be something that we would want to talk maybe with the Delaware Preservation Fund or other entities about how maybe that could work better to address to make it maybe more effective and perhaps more equitable, speaking to as I said, some of the other comments that we received. There was also discussion about looking at materials and what counts as appropriate historic preservation materials. The National Park Service actually just put out some additional guidance on this, on substitute materials, because people sometimes think, oh, if I can't, use exactly this kind of wood siding, then I can't do this project. And that is not necessarily the case. And just maybe I don't know that some probably would want to see some changes there, but I also think it might be more about just making sure that everybody understands what flexibility there already is. And then also talking about National Register nominations. Folks, University of Delaware's presentation and the presentation from Chandra and Anna earlier today was talking about a nomination that someone would want to take on. I think that there could be some further explanation or further exploration of how to support having properties nominated to the National Register and looking for some perhaps partnering with other entities to try and help support folks who might want to take on that project, because it can be a little bit daunting if you haven't really taken it on before. And then engagement. So lots of different ideas about how could better engage with more people, and because with this sense that with more awareness, more information out there about how these places are important to the history of the state of Delaware. That there's more, if with more information out there, there's more awareness, there's more support. Kind of goes back to that question I was talking about earlier about where people are getting their information, the need for getting good information consistently in the hands of local sources, engagement at all levels, marketing, communicating that value. There was some specific suggestions in this area. There was talk about creating a directory of resources, sort of a one-stop shop of where to find things. And I think that's something that we've maybe has been tried before. Also like a speakers bureau that I think has also something that we've had before, but maybe revisiting some of those ideas. Some other suggestions were about having town halls, making better use of volunteer work in local communities. So these are just some of the things that we were hearing that I think will really help inform where this plan goes. So I think I skipped too far ahead. No. Okay. No, actually, we're there. So for some reason, oh, there we go. So that was what I wanted to share. And before jumping into questions, comments, and ideas, I'm going to come back to the screen in just a minute. But just telling you briefly about where our next steps are for the rest of this work, getting to this plan. Rest of this year, we're going to be focused on additional outreach to stakeholders, analysis of the data, continuing that work, which I've been alluding to, preparing the first draft of the plan, submitting that to the National Park Service and also to some other stakeholders on that first draft and getting some feedback. And then in 2026, addressing comments received, maybe going back to some of our stakeholders for further guidance, and then preparing the final plan. It goes to the State Review Board for Historic Preservation for official adoption, and then publishing and sharing plans. So now I'm going to go back to questions, comments, and ideas. And thank you for listening.
Wow, that's terrific, Gwen. Thank you so much. It's great to get an update on where you are and what the next few months will bring. And there's still opportunity for everyone to participate. And there always is time and room for everyone to participate, but specific to this deadline for the plan, which will guide the SHPO for the next 5 years officially, now's your chance to get in. So couple questions in the Q&A. The first being, could there be a recommendation in the plan to add the SHPO to the Cabinet Committee on State Planning Issues?
That's actually a very excellent question. And I think I will have to say that it is something that we have thought of. If not our office, at least being included on that committee, at least including it as one of the key things that the committee is focused on. And that is actually something we've asked the Office of State Planning Coordination about before. And we will be reaching out to them to talk about that as well as like where they are in their plan and where our planning efforts can help each other.
I think it's an awesome suggestion. Is it,
yes.
So is it something that will be in black and white in the plan as a potential goal?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Well, now that I don't know if anyone has raised this issue before in the comments you've received to date, but now that it's been raised here, for instance, will it be in black and white as part of the possible recommended goal?
I think we are taking that note, and yep, I think we can certainly put that in our list of things to.
Or Nathan, you need to click on the link and make it official.
Yeah.
Click on the link that's in the chat, everyone.
No, and you know, my colleague Hannah is taking notes as well. So yeah, we're making note of these comments. So thank you.
All right, good. I think that's an awesome idea. And you know, to your comment earlier, I would say that maybe here in Delaware, you don't need very many people to speak up on, on one issue or suggestion to have it be a chorus, really, I guess. I've heard said that you need at least 7 people to speak up on something before like a congressman would take notice or something. But I think here in Delaware, the number is actually much lower. And just a few, really, of less than 5 voices can make a difference and kind of get an issue or a suggestion on a radar screen. So I think people might be surprised by that it doesn't take, a huge amount of effort just to raise an issue here in Delaware. So the next question in the Q&A is a state section 106 would be huge in shifting how the state invests in things like schools, armories, public office buildings, and repurposes buildings for things like housing, etc. Moving here from another state, it makes it so your life is framed by the grand experience of being in a historic place that tells your community's history. Can the SHPO make this argument and advocate for more resources? And I will say that Gwen mentioned that Preservation Delaware led on a study kind of looking at our neighbors and beyond, kind of what state level 106 policies they have in place. And we do have that in a report. I'm not sure it's on our website, but if it's not, I will make sure it is. And it is a priority of ours to try to get something done along those lines. So I guess, Gwen, if as to the question, if we can just maybe emphasize that in your in one of the goals for the planning document.
So thank you, Nathan, for the question. And it is, there's a lot to consider with this as the study that Dee was referring to or will illustrate. So first thing, I do want to go back to that importance of recognizing that this is not just what the SHPO can do. And also that making sure that if we put this in the plan as a specific action item, that it's assigned to someone to take on. The SHPO cannot lobby for specific resources or funding or for specific legislation. That has to come from without. First of all, as a state agency, we have that prohibition, and also as a part of our conditions of receiving federal funds, we cannot directly lobby. And but I think what would be important to note here is that the study would need to kind of go a step further to say, okay, how do you want your state level section 106 to be? Because you can do all kinds of different levels. There's some states who are only looking at what state-owned properties. There are others that go a little further that say, okay, any state-funded project. Those are 2 very different things. And so there would have to be a sense of the climate of what would the state of Delaware as a whole be willing to take on. And there is a capacity issue, as I mentioned before. And it's, of course, as the deputy SHPO, and my first thought is like, I don't have the staff to do that right now. Although philosophically, would I be interested in that? Yes, but we barely have the capacity to do what we're doing now. But also, being realistic, this would also mean that the other state agencies would also have to have resources at their disposal to do the studies that would be necessary and to coordinate with our office and with the public, because that's also a key element of Section 106 at the federal level. A lot to consider there, and I think. Like with anything if for those who are considering at the local level historic preservation ordinances, when we have entities that approach us about ordinances, we always kind of try to say, take the temperature of your community, have an understanding of what how far they want a preservation ordinance to go. I mean, everybody likes to think about Cape May and what color, you know, you can paint your house. None of the ordinances for local governments that I know of actually go quite that far. As you have to know your community. And I would say that if you're talking about the state level, you have to do the same.
That's great. Nathan, I'd say let's talk and we can maybe you can help Preservation Delaware with that conversation and moving it forward, because it's definitely something I would love to see move forward in some way, shape, or form. You know, noting the difficulties and challenges that Gwen talked about. Um, so another question in the chat is about the Caesar, Rodney, and Columbus statues and getting them reinstalled. So I guess I have thoughts on that, Gwen, but I'll let you go first.
We heard that and actually I mentioned this in the public meeting. I didn't mention it today, but we did hear a few comments like that in our survey. And I think we have to recognize that these with the controversies that come with these kinds of resources, that there's more than one way to look at them, right? And that a preservation plan has to acknowledge that. And there has to be room for all voices from the state to talk about what's important to people. And I think that I would say that HCA, I can't speak to HCA as a whole. Our director, unfortunately, and who is also the State Historic Preservation Officer, is not available today. She's traveling today. I would want to refer that question to her. But one of the important things to note, though, is that those statues and things like that are owned by a specific entity. The Caesar Rodney statue is owned by the city of Wilmington. And so there's not this, in the end, this is not an us decision. It's not and you know, Preservation Delaware may have their own views on this as well. I think it speaks to the need for a broader conversation and not just, oh, we're gonna put it here. There's been some discussion on we're aware of some state legislation that's been considered about possibly placing the statue, the Caesar Rodney statue in particular. I'm not as familiar with the Columbus one, but somewhere here in Dover, and I don't know. I have a couple different thoughts about that, but they're more like my personal thoughts than I am about because you also have to think about the statue was part of a historic district in the city of Wilmington. So I guess I have some questions about that kind of relocation. But I also, you know, as I said, it's a broader conversation. And Dee, I don't know if you want to speak to.
Yeah, no, briefly, I think just it's a very tricky, complicated discussion, and I don't think it's going to be solved easily. As you said, each one is owned by separate entities, and I'll just say that we did have a webinar kind of covering this topic or some of the challenges on this topic a couple years back when they were soon after they were taken down. A lot of them were taken down. So I think that's still on our YouTube channel if anyone wants to refer there and just watch that webinar for what that discussion was. But appreciate the question, and we will see what happens. Another, let's see, Charlie in the chat makes the point about some little over much redundancy among agencies, and all inquiries should go directly to the state agency. They know where to refer one. Demand coordination with DENREC and DelDOT. I guess he's referring just to whether or not we had a 106. Okay. And Nathan question about just for the plan, I guess, being interested in a more robust reference to the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan.
Okay.
So, and if you want to touch on that.
Well, I want to speak to Charlie's note first, and I know we're close to out of time, but the outdoor recreation plan, yeah, that's also a good one to note. So thank you, Nathan, for that. But so Charlie, I'm not entirely sure which direction you were headed with that, but I will just, on one level, I will just say our staff greatly values that there are historic preservation professionals in DNREC and DelDOT. If they were not there, our lives would be much more difficult. And I can't emphasize this enough when if you're talking about Section 106 or other kinds of project related things, the working relationships is what is key to all of it. And I do think that there is some value to ensuring that all parts of a broader agency, and that could speak to ours as well. We're not, we're SHPO within the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs, within the Department of State. There's certainly some communication strategies that could be employed there to make sure that all the entities there know that we're all kind of communicating well. But I also think that within DelDOT, within DNREC, there could be some work towards communication about historic preservation issues, especially for properties that they own or may be affecting. But maybe to your point about making sure that there is information, that there's good information, that it's easy to find. I will be the first to admit that our website could use a little work on where to find important information. So I think that's to that part of Charlie's question. Again, I'm not entirely sure that that's what you were thinking about, but I think that but you're absolutely right about adaptive reuse. I was speaking to that earlier. It is key, and that occupancy, you're right. I mean, occupancy is important. And one of the things that we also often encourage folks, and I know that Suzanne Savory, our director, was just recently talking to some constituents about this. Here's this wonderful building. It needs a lot of attention, a lot of work, and a lot of investment, but need to be looking to the vision for the future use, because that's going to tell you what kind of funds and resources that you need and where you might get those resources and funds to assist. Because if you are, as I'm sure many of you could attest, if you just have this idea, oh, I love this building, and I have my favorites too. I love this building. I would hate to see it be lost, but okay, well, what would it be its next life? If it can't be used for what it was originally used for, what could be its next useful life that still respects its history and its materials?
Excellent. Well, I was struck by one of your slides and what you talked about, Gwen, about kind of the three pillars of policy or governance and funding and engagement. And I think, although I think a lot of us would like to see some policy change, they are hard won. And that is something Preservation Delaware is interested in pursuing. If anyone is interested in getting involved with us to pursue some, anything along those lines, please get in touch with us. The funding piece, I think everyone is aware of kind of what's going on in DC with funding shifts and how that impacts Delaware. The report the other day that Delaware stands to lose about 400, or I guess the budget shortfall is expected to be about $400 million. So I think the next few years might be a little tough, but the third pillar of what Gwen mentioned is engagement. And I think everyone, I just encourage everyone to get involved, to speak up, to get engaged with Preservation Delaware or your local historical society, your local commission. Reach out to the State Historic Preservation Office and see if you can help in some way, because it's not, as Gwen started out in the very beginning, it's not, trying to make a difference in this realm and protect more resources is not just up to the state office. It's not all on the backs of Preservation Delaware. It's for all of us. And we really need everyone to speak up. I witness firsthand almost every month how one or two voices can make a difference at the Newcastle County Historic District Commission, the review board. So as I said earlier, really just a small number of voices can really make a difference, talking with your state legislators, et cetera. So I think that third piece of what Gwen talked about is just, really critical for everyone to bear in mind. And specifically today to Gwen's talk is please click on the link and express your thoughts to the state and get involved in the planning for the next 5 years. So Gwen, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we always look forward to partnering with your office, and appreciate you being with us here today. All right. With everyone, thank you. We hope to see many, if not most, if not all of you tomorrow at the Blue Ball Barn at 2 o'clock. We've got an exciting array of speakers tomorrow, including Carol Quillen, who is the CEO of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and Eric Hine, who is a PDI board member, lives in Delaware, but he also is the executive director of the National Council for State Historic Preservation offices across the country. So as well as history of the Blue Ball Barn and some other interesting agenda items. So please do come to the Blue Ball Barn tomorrow. If you don't have a ticket, it's not too late. We hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us today. And all of these sessions will be on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
I can. You were live, so.
Okay. So Barksdale is I sent him a link